Sometimes you don't want to extract something into a new widget, but maybe you want to clean up your widget tree down there. And that can be shown in the main Dart file. There we have a relatively long widget tree, also because we have these checks for if is landscape, is not landscape, is not landscape, is landscape. So essentially you could say the content of our widget tree here, of the my homepage state, basically only depends on the question whether we're in landscape mode or not. We always have the single child scroll view and the column, but what's inside of the column is totally different. In such a case, of course, you could either put the landscape mode into a separate widget and the non-landscape mode in a separate widget, but you could also argue that these are not really separate widgets. They're all part of one and the same widget, it's just a different alignment or a difference regarding how they are displayed. Still, if you want to clean up your widget tree down there, you can add a so-called builder method. With that, I'm not meaning functions or arguments like here on show modal bottom sheets, which also are builder functions here, but I mean a method you add to your own widget, which is only called internally, which returns a widget in the end. That's important. It does not return void. It returns a widget, and you give it a name like build landscape content, and maybe also a second one widget, a widget which builds the portrait content, like this. The idea with these methods is that you can simply call these methods from inside your build method down there, and you simply outsource content you had in your build method down there up into these methods, so that the widget tree that is created is exactly the same. It's exactly the same result, but your code, hopefully, is a bit more readable. So what you can do here is you can grab this row for is landscape, cut it here, so that we don't have it here in the build method, and instead return this here for build landscape content. So in build landscape content, I'm returning exactly the same thing I had in my build method down there, but down there, now instead of having all the content here, I just call underscore build landscape content. And important, you need to execute this by calling or by adding parentheses here. Because when Dart parses this, this should be executed. This then returns a widget, and that's the widget which is inserted here into the widget tree. So same result as before, but of course now easier to read. The same here if we don't have landscape mode. So if we are in portrait mode, let's grab that and return this here in build portrait content. Now important here, we rely on the media query and on the app bar, so we should accept both here as input. Now media query here is actually of type media query data. So here we have media query data, media query, which we're getting. And app bar is of type app bar. So here we should accept this argument too. So these are arguments which are now passed to build portrait content. And now again, you use this method to call it down there, like this. And now forward media query and app bar. This is now way more readable. Now, of course, we have two other checks for not is landscape and is landscape. And we might want to merge the content for this into our builder methods we just added. Before we do that, let me first of all point at txlist widget. This is another improvement we're already using. Here, we're outsourcing the content for a widget into a variable. And this makes sense if you need the same widget, the exact same widget with the exact same configuration in different places of your widget tree, often in places which are rendered in an either or condition. That's something we're already doing to avoid code duplication, and that's a good thing. But now back to merging the content we have for portrait mode here into this builder method here, and our landscape content we have here into the builder method here for landscape content. Now you might think that you simply take that transaction list widget, which is for portrait mode, and then you go to your build method for portrait content, and there we are returning the container, so let's add a comma after it and also return this widget here, this variable. Now this has two problems. For one, this variable isn't defined here. So we would have to accept it as an argument. That's certainly something we can do. The more important problem is that you can't return two values. You can always only return one value in a method, in Dart in general, in basically any programming language in general. So this does not work. Of course, you could return a list by wrapping this into square brackets, because then you return one value, a list, and the list then has multiple values. But now a list is not a widget, so that would not work. However, what you can do is, of course, here you could return a list of widgets. Now this would be correct. And now if you also accept this argument here, which is, of course, of type widget, then you can use your builder method down there, forward the txListWidget variable, which we define in the build method, and pass this to buildPortrait_content, which will then indeed return a list of widgets. But now we have a new problem. A list of widgets is not accepted as a widget by Flutter. Of course, here in the children of our column, it wants a list of widgets, of single widgets. It does not want a list of widgets, but that's what we're creating here. This builder method returns a list of widgets and not a single widget. Now, when we call it here, it therefore enters or adds this list of widgets into this list of widgets, and that's not what Flutter wants. It wants a single widget. Now, a good solution here is another modern syntax Dart supports, the so-called spread operator. The spread operator is also available in JavaScript, for example, and it's simply 3 dots. Now this looks strange. You add these 3 dots in front of a list, so in front of square brackets, or like here, in front of a function or a method that returns a list. And of course, buildPortrait_content does return a list. Now, what do these 3 dots do with the list in front of which you added? These 3 dots tell Dart that you want to pull all the elements out of that list and merge them as single elements into that surrounding list which we have here, the children list for our column. So now instead of adding a list to a list, we're adding all the elements of this list as single items next to each other in this list. We're flattening the list, so to say. Instead of creating a nested list, we pull out the items and add them as normal items to the outer list. So now we only have a list of widgets because this here, these 3 dots, transform our list of widgets into just widgets, into 2 widgets. Now, of course, you can use the spread operator not just with lists of widgets. You can also use the spread operator with lists of numbers. If you have another scenario where you want to add a list of numbers as single numbers into an outer list, and so on. And with that pattern, we can also, of course, do the same down there for our ternary expression, where we show either our chart or the transaction list. We can simply go up to our builder method for the landscape content here, and also wrap this into square brackets and return a list of widgets here as well. Return square brackets here and add a comma after the closing row, and then add our ternary expression. And here now we also need the media query, the app bar, and the transaction list widget. So these same arguments we needed here for build portrait content. Hence I'll copy the argument list from there and add it to build landscape content here. With that, in the place where we call build landscape content, we have to pass the same arguments we passed to build portrait content, just like this. And since this now also returns a list of widgets, add 3 dots in front of it to use the spread operator to convert the list of widgets into just widgets that are added to the outer list. And now this if statement down there can be removed. So with that, the advantage is not that we have less code in this file, we just moved the code into a different position, but we have a more readable build method down there now. We have basically just a column down there, and then we can clearly see that we seem to have 2 alternative conditions, and that we call different methods for each condition. We can see that we seem to get back a list where we pull out elements, and if we want to find out what's in a method, well, then we can simply control or command click on it and then change our code for that content in this place here. So it's not helping performance, it's not making the file shorter, it even added a few lines, but it makes our build method down there more readable. So that's why using builder methods, not build, but builder methods that build you parts of your widget tree can be very helpful for improving code readability. They don't have to return lists of widgets. If you only need to return one widget, you can do that too. But you can also return lists of widgets here with the help of the spread operator.